Okay, this is the Arcane Formulas by William Walker Atkinson, first published in 1909. The Arcane Formulas comes in 10 lessons. This video will give you lesson 1, but I'm going to tell you the names of the 10 lessons to get us started here. Lesson 1 is called Egohood. Lesson 2, Establishing the Ego, Part 1. Lesson 3, Establishing the Ego, Part 2. Lesson 4, Establishing the Ego, Part 3. Lesson 5, Will Focalization. Lesson 6, The Excluded Middle. Lesson 7, Mastering the Opposites. Lesson 8, Neutralizing Rhythm. Lesson 9, Cyclicity and Balance. And Lesson 10, Mentalism in a Nutshell. Let's get started with Lesson 1, Egohood. Lesson 1, Egohood. In the arcane lessons, or the arcane teaching, you have seen that the individual is but a center of consciousness and force in the great life principle, cosmic will or spirit. As aphorism 12 has informed you, there is but one life and not many lives. Separateness is but relative and partial, illusory, the creative fiction of the cosmos. In the cosmic will, there is but one life in which and by which is manifested the many. And you have also seen that egohood, and egohood here is capitalized, is evolved and earned, not given as a universal birthright or general natural right of the race. As aphorism 13 has informed you, the ego, again with a capital E, is evolved from the personal self, with capital P and capital S. Every living thing possesses a personal self, but even among men, many fail to reach egohood. Egohood is earned, not bestowed as a universal natural gift. Many personalities are born, but few egos are evolved. Now, egohood is the state of realization of the ego, the perception and realization of the I am. As an old English writer once said, quote, whether we try to avoid it or not, we must face this reality sometime, the reality of our own egohood, that which makes us say I, and in saying I leads to the discovery of a new world. End of quote. The average person is surprised, incredulous, and even indignant when he is informed that but very few of the race really have this awareness or consciousness of the I am within them. He will insist that he is fully aware of the existence of the I and cannot imagine that anyone can have the audacity to dispute the proposition. But a little self-examination will reveal the fact that he has but the first glimmering of self-consciousness, which is far from being the consciousness of egohood. We have no desire or intention of entering into an extended metaphysical inquiry in these pages, but we must point out to you what egohood is not, as the first step toward showing you what it is and how it may be acquired. The very elementary life forms have merely the consciousness of something outside, evidenced in sensation or feeling. The atoms manifest a faint degree of awareness, that is, consciousness, of other atoms, which is evidenced in attraction and repulsion. There is in chemical affinity a higher degree of elementary consciousness. The crystals manifest a still higher degree in their activities of building up form. The cell forms of the lowest animal and plant life show an awareness of objects of food, and of other forms which seek them for food, and consequently they move toward the first and away from the second. Rising in the evolutionary scale, we find constantly increasing degrees of consciousness. Among the higher animals and the lower forms of men, we find what science has called simple consciousness, by which is indicated that awareness of outside objects, accompanied by a greater or lesser degree of reasoning regarding them. The dog, horse, and other higher animals give us a typical example of this form of consciousness, which degree is but little surpassed by the less developed of the human race. Many of the latter not having advanced further in the scale. Simple consciousness may be described as a state of knowing, but not knowing that one knows. It is a consciousness of outside things received through the senses, and also of the physical sensations arising in one's own body. But as man advanced in the scale, there came to him the degree of consciousness which is known as self-consciousness, in which the sense of I comes to him. He differentiates between the self and the not-self as he understands it. He not only knows, but he begins to know that he knows. He begins to understand that he has a knowing machine by means of which he knows, thinks, and is conscious, and is consciousness. The mental gaze in this stage begins to turn itself inward as well as outward. But the majority of the race possess this self-consciousness to but a very limited degree. As a leading psychologist has well said, quote, "Many persons never have more than a misty idea of such a mental attitude. They take themselves for granted and never turn to gaze inward." End quote. Self-consciousness, like simple consciousness, has many degrees on its scale. One has but to study his fellow men in order to perceive these varying degrees. We cannot pause here to consider this stage in detail. Our concern is with higher degrees. In a general way, and in order that you may make the clear distinction between simple consciousness and self-consciousness, we suggest that you think of the former as an awareness of the outside world and one's own physical being, and of the latter as an awareness of one's own mind. Or the former may be thought of as physical consciousness, and the latter as mental consciousness. But here and there among the multitude of men are evolved a few who have attained a higher stage of consciousness, the ego consciousness, or consciousness of egohood, which, surpassing the physical consciousness and the mental consciousness just alluded to, may be styled spiritual consciousness. For the ego consciousness is really the consciousness of spirit in an elementary degree. There are many other and higher degrees. Ego consciousness, or realization of egohood, is more than an awareness of the outside world, or of one's own body as distinct from the bodies of others and other things. It is more than even the awareness of one's own mind, even when this awareness is carried to a high degree of development. It is difficult to describe this plane of consciousness to those who have not attained it, but it may be stated as an awareness of individuality rather than an awareness of personality. Personality is but the character in which the one life is playing a certain part. As we have said in the ARCANE teaching, the very word person is derived from the Greek word persona, meaning a mask used by actors. Your personality is merely the part in life you are playing, the John Smith part of you, and consequently, the awareness of personality is merely an awareness or consciousness of your own personal character, just as an actor is aware and conscious of the character of the play he is enacting. If you can imagine the actor forgetting his real self and becoming so earnest and wrapped in the play that he imagines that he really is Hamlet, or Richard III, or Mephistopheles, you may gain a clearer idea of the state of consciousness of the man on the plane of personal consciousness. When he shakes off the illusion and realizes that he is something more than the assumed character, when you awaken to the fact that you are something more than John Smith, then the personality is seen to be in reality but an assumed character, or mask used by actors. The consciousness of individuality is an awareness by man that he is above the limits and character of personality, that he is a center of consciousness and force in the one cosmic life. This awareness must, however, be more than a mere intellectual acquiescence in the teaching to that effect, or an agreement with some teacher. Important as these steps are in approaching the realization, they are but foothills above which tower the mountains of the real cosmic knowing. The individual must know that he is an individual, just as he knows anything that he has experienced. For indeed, he must really experience the fact that he is an ego center in the cosmic life or spirit. He must realize that he is more than body and mind, that he is indeed spirit in spirit. No mere intellectual acquiescence or understanding will supply the real experience of egohood. It is not necessary for one to have experienced cosmic consciousness, or the awareness of his identity with the cosmic spirit as a whole, to gain egohood. This experience belongs to a higher stage. The individual must, however, experience the realization that he is an ego, a spiritual entity, before he attains egohood. Many grow into this stage naturally and by slow and gradual steps. In fact, all development must be along natural lines. One cannot be dragged or pulled up into this stage. One must grow into it naturally as the plant develops and blooms into flower. But, and here is an important point, and one upon which depends the usefulness of these lessons. There are many who are ready and prepared to throw off the sheath of personality and to enter into the fuller life of egohood, who are struggling with the confining bonds of personality which they find hard to throw off. To these, and to these only, the methods and exercises given herein will appeal. If they appeal to you, if they attract you and you hunger to put them into effect, then know that you are ready for them and ready to throw off the confining sheaths that are binding you and holding you back. As we proceed, you will see that in this realization of egohood lies the secret of attainment, the key of power. Before you can exercise the power of spirit, you must realize that you are spirit. Spirit is the essence of the cosmos. The ego is a focal point or center in that essence. That is the end of lesson 1. The next video in the series will be lesson 2, part 1 of establishing the ego.